the purpose of the conversation today is to discuss how retailers can drive down cost of carriage and optimize for cost reduction in the final mile. Particularly interested in kind of talking about smart allocation, what that means, and also kind of the increasing prevalence of PUDO, pick up, drop off, as well, and how retailers can use that to look at potential cost optimizations as well in terms of last mile deliveries. So, Paul, can you start by just giving me a quick rundown on what we mean when we talk about smart allocation?
Hey, Dan. Yes. Yeah, right. Let's talk about smart allocations, right? Before we get into the smart element, let's talk about the basics of what is an allocation, right? So
Yeah.
it's a topic that's kind of cropped up with some of my existing customers just in the last week. We start with either a consignment or a shipment. They're more or less the same thing, right? But when you create either a consignment or a shipment within the sorted platform, it's a representation of the physical job. So what it is, it's a statement of requirements. It's a parcel, or it's multiple parcels. It's going to go from this location to this location. Its weights and dimensions are expressed. So if you were to look at it, creating that object is kind of like your statement of requirements. Okay. Now, when we talk about allocation, it's matching that set of requirements up to a carrier. Okay, and specifically a carrier service. Okay, so it's the bringing together of those two elements. So that's what we're talking about when we say allocation. So how do you do that in a kind of a smart way? Okay, so the way that we do this is you look at the requirements. So you look at the weights, dimensions, the geographies, any time requirements, etc. And then what we do is we pass through a series of algorithms or logic. Okay. Now, at the risk of it sounding really complex, we break this down into some basic levels. Okay. So it goes A, B, C. A is who is available to do that job. So, we said that creating the object is a statement of requirements. So level A is looking through your carrier service portfolio and saying who could do this job. And that creates a list. Okay. Once we've got that list of who is capable of doing the job based on their weights and dimensions, where they deliver, where they don't deliver, we then move on to, have you as the user created any blocking conditions? Okay. And a blocking condition might just be that the carrier is capable of doing the job, but you've set some rules to say, actually, in this circumstance, for this value of order, for instance, I don't want that carrier to do that job. Okay. So who's available, any blocking conditions, and then finally, cost. So if you've got multiple runners that have made it through those different levels, then the ultimate aim of our platform is to find you the most cost efficient carrier service that can do that job. So that really is kind of the smart allocation. The mission objective is to find the right carrier service for that job at the cheapest price.
Got it. So if I'm a retailer and I don't have the concept of smart allocation, i.e. I might be connected directly into or integrated directly into XYZ carriers.
Yeah.
Can I do that? What does the opposing view look like?
Yeah, so we definitely see that. So we would refer to that as like a direct allocation or an allocation with service code. So if you're the kind of business that has some preset rules around I must deliver, it could be that you've got like an exclusive arrangement that that product or that range only gets delivered through that carrier for reasons. So we provide methods to cater for all different types of allocation. So that would be a direct allocation with carrier service. All that really indicates is that you're holding the reasons, the business logic on your side. So you're just giving us a direct instruction that this must ship with this carrier service. The one thing to say though is we still protect the carriers from level A. So we
Mhm.
will only allow that to happen if the carrier is capable, if they're available to do that job, as in they will carry 20 kilos to the Outer Hebrides, then that's kind of our we're the custodians of that. We have to protect the carrier service to make sure it is aligned with doing that job.
Got it. So the rules that you just mentioned there, kind of the A, B, and C, so the availability, the blocking logic, and then the cost. So that all sounds great, but is that something that I, as a retailer, I've got to be kind of deeply involved in setting up and managing? And is it something I need to be in daily monitoring? What does that look like, or can I just fire and forget?
Okay, so our aim is to keep this really lightweight. We've tried, incredibly hard over the years in the product to keep this configuration level and to keep this accessible to administrators. That well, let's flip this. What we see our competitors doing often in this space is really flexible ways of working, but highly complex. They use programmatic expressions, right, which are quite scary for a user because you obviously feel like if you get that wrong, there could be huge impacts, right? We've talked about optimizing, the allocation outcomes. What if I got that wrong? So we've definitely seen users being quite afraid of doing that kind of configuration, especially when it's like programmatic expressions. So what we've always kept true to is that the features are either wizard experiences, so step by step. You do this thing, you do this thing, you do this thing, you configure the rule. Um, it's always done through a user interface, so it's very intuitive and takes really minimal amount of time. So, from configuring a brand new rule to saving that and either doing that in the sandbox and then testing the outcomes, you're probably talking a couple of minutes to actually do that from end to end. And if you get it wrong, you can undo that instantly, right? So one of the terms that kind of gets bandied around in this space is low code, high
Yeah.
config, right? And that's what we're aiming for. Is these rules should not be an IT project, right? Which would be high code. So low code means no coding effort to deal with this, and it's all config. So a few button pushes, admin authorized kind of changes. And from a frequency perspective, I see different use cases operating in different ways. Someone who's very, very finely tuned on load balancing might be doing little tweaks and changes on a daily basis. So a couple of minutes time investment per day, right? But that's what I would refer to as very, very highly tuned. So
Mhm.
that's someone who's really, focused on doing that. Um, I'd say kind of what's normal would be maybe monthly or quarterly changes. So where I see carrier management teams looking back and kind of analysing, right, how was our performance? Did we manage the volumes in the way that we expected? Are the carriers performing the way that we expected? Typically, I would see users then going, okay, I might make some changes to my allocation rules now based on that understanding and that knowledge that I've built up over a month or a quarter.
Mhm.
So very, very different. Probably rare to see someone never making changes.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's probably like the extreme case of going, yeah, we did it once, we set it up at the beginning and we never touched it again. But that probably is the case with some of our competitors that, they put, there's a lot of time that goes into these programmatic kind of expressions very early on, and then everyone's scared of making changes, so they just back away. So,
Yeah.
we like to see people making changes, but being really super confident with making those changes.
Yeah. And just on that, um, who, in your experience, because obviously you're across a lot of our customers and you've been in this industry a long time, who is it who you see typically is owning that? So folks that are more deliberate and more intentional with managing the smart allocation and thinking about that logic, who is it that you see typically is owning that within the customer?
Usually the carrier management team.
Yeah.
So this is the guys and the girls that are charged with working really closely with the carrier service providers. They're managing costs. They're usually on the hook for the expenditure.
Yeah.
So that's why they're empowered to be able to basically change the flight controls, be in control of those commercial outcomes. What did we spend with carrier A? What did we spend with carrier B? Was that the most efficient? Yeah, years ago it used to always be like IT teams
Yeah.
that were on the hook, but of course they're not at the heart of the cost ownership, and the outcomes. It was just considered to be, oh well, it's an IT change, therefore it should sit with an IT team. I think we've managed to flip that, and we see business stakeholders now at the flight controls.
Well, it's an interesting balance, isn't it? Because I mean, we speak to customers quite a lot, and you've got, in some instances, you've got this dynamic where you're right, it's the carrier managers who wholly own it because they are on the hook for the budget, so they own the carrier budget and therefore want to drive reductions and efficiencies as much as they possibly can. But oftentimes, particularly the larger the e-commerce retailer and the more customer focused they are, meeting the customer proposition and working closely with the service experience or commercial colleagues is equally important. So balancing customer proposition with efficiency, that's an interesting dynamic, isn't it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, I think you're right to observe that that gap. I think with more, let's be more specific, with more mature retailers that kind of understand that craft, they have definitely kind of reduced the air gap. So you've got your .com teams working in lockstep with the ops teams now, and to do exactly what you've just described, which is focusing on the critical success factors of, did we meet the customer promise? That might not always be the cheapest option, but what's as a retailer, what's more important to you? Probably control your costs, but make informed decisions. So if you're slipping on customer promise, do you know how to then turn the dial to be able to use different services to meet that promise? But it might have been more expensive. So you've missed your cheapest option, but you're now focusing on, look, customer success is the key factor now. So you're right. I think the more mature retailers are definitely bringing those elements together and then going, right, what dials can we turn? How do we actually control that?
Yeah, interesting stuff. And where do you see the value of a CMS or a vendor like Sorted and the use of smart allocation starting to really add value from a cost reduction point of view? Is there almost like a tipping curve in terms of the complexity of carrier services that a retailer might want to deliver to its consumers, where it becomes valuable to help them reduce costs or optimize what they're doing? How do you tend to view that?
So obviously we try and sit kind of right at the center of all of what we see as being the kind of the key stakeholders. So we've got the retailer, we've got the carrier, and we've got the consumer, and we're trying to balance that playing field, right, to give everyone the best outcome. With regards to how do we address that kind of value for the retailer and for the carrier? Carriers will try where possible to provide all service options, right? Doesn't necessarily mean that all that traffic is perfect for them. So what they'll try and do is to augment their services. To say, look, I've got this service, it delivers on a next day to all of the UK. Then they'll start to add surcharges. Now that's not kind of like it's not an underhanded technique. It's just it's augmenting their proposition to basically make sure that they're able to do the job and they're able to cover the cost, right? So if it's a delivery to the Outer Hebrides, there'll very likely be a surcharge associated with the Highlands and Islands element. Okay, so by doing smart allocations or by trying to find the optimum, what you're actually doing is you, you are trying to help the carrier. You're trying to give them the traffic that suits them the best, which should be the most optimally priced traffic because that's their happy hunting ground. By constantly forcing traffic that a carrier is priced really highly with, with surcharges, that's kind of the indication that that's not the kind of traffic that they want, or it's not the most cost effective. So by using things like smart allocations, we are trying to balance, look, the interests of the retailer and the consumer is find the most efficient route to market, but also find the carrier the best traffic that is profitable for them. Now, obviously, we're not scrutinizing profitability for the carrier, but we're just interpreting their commercial offering by looking at base costs plus surcharges, and then we also even offer allocation rules that allow you to load balance. So, if you've got kind of capped agreements with carriers or just for your own kind of operational requirements, you've got a certain number of trailers, and if you go above that, you'll get an extra charge. Then we provide the ability to set those limits, to say, okay, they might be the cheapest when you get to the bottom of the ABC logic, but actually I've agreed I'm only going to send 10,000 a day. So again, we're trying as far as possible to blend the sort of daily operational requirements and practices with good kind of commercial outcomes.
Are you, so obviously at the moment there's some fairly considerable economic headwinds that retailers and carriers are all facing. Are you seeing any particular trends within your customer base or the market as a whole to look at cost reduction in the final mile more aggressively? And do you see any particular kind of formats of carrier proposition kind of increasing in demand as a result of that?
I think it will take a while to see really strong trends, but I think the sort of the early signals are, I think retailers in general are paying much closer attention to things like surcharges. I just mentioned in talking about allocation rules and so on. So I think being more focused on, look, how is that applied? Is it applied appropriately? Or as often is the case in kind of large scale operations, is everything just caught in the broad brushstrokes? Is it broadly correct? I think everyone's now needing to kind of look at a much closer level to just inspect that and basically keep everybody honest. It's I'm not suggesting that there's any like poor practices, but it just is what it is. When you're dealing with really, really high volumes, it becomes quite difficult to have very laser precise focus or checking exercises on everything. So I think that's showing itself in the trends. I think we're starting to see that kind of focus. I'm also hearing from some of my customers as well that they're getting into good, healthy conversations around kind of pickup and trunking practices. So, large heavy commercial vehicles are not cheap to run. Fuel is not cheap. Drivers' wages, drivers are quite scarce these days. So I think rationalizing that element, because it's a big blocky cost element. So I think being smart around how the goods are actually injected into the carrier networks, is there optimization that could be done? So loading at warehouse 1 and then topping off at warehouse 2, all still within the same retailer organization. But again, I think in the broad brushstrokes operationally, that would have been just kind of dealt with in the rounding. All right, so we need this many commercial vehicles, and that'll more or less cover things. I think people are really looking at, is there any space on that vehicle? How can we get that topped off with something else?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, one of the things that has come up in some of the conversations that I've had with other colleagues in the organisation and in customer conversations recently as well is also around pick up and drop off, and how I guess that offers a potential opportunity to optimize some costs, but also meet potentially increasing sort of customer demand as well. What's your kind of thoughts on pickup drop off as a I was going to say emerging. It's not emerging. It's been around for a while, but increasingly embedded service offering.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really great option, and I think consumers, have got they've got the loud voice on this, which is it's really convenient. Obviously, the kind of the scales have tipped slightly post COVID because there's more of us that are working from home. So that actually makes it easier to get a first time delivery attempt done successfully. We actually conducted some consumer research to ask consumers, look, which aspects do you value the most? So at the top of the responses, 37% of consumers said that delivery on time was the most important thing. And then surprisingly followed by 32% saying, well, actually low shipping costs was the next most important thing. And then 26% of consumers said that proactive updates about their either an outbound delivery or the return was the most important thing to them. Where I think it's changed though, and it's started to kind of really gel now as like a service offering, is a lot of carriers are offering like in-flight changes, so they're getting really smart with tracking events, which obviously we're a consumer of tracking events, so we try and optimize how much can you do with those tracking events. So I think the more that we collectively keep the consumers in the loop to say, hey, this is in the network, this is now out for delivery, giving consumers the option to go, actually, I've been called into the office, so I'm not going to be around today. I would normally, when I placed the order, I thought I'd be around, but something's changed. I've got to go in the office now. Being able to do an in-flight change to say, don't deliver to my door, take it to a locker. So I didn't start that journey with a PUDO option, but then I've taken up a PUDO option partway through. I think that's a really great sort of adaptation, as you said, Dan. PUDO was always showing up as a really kind of positive option. Because it's flexible, you've got to get out and about, you've got to travel, you've got to go to work and do things. You pick up your parcel then when you're passing. But I think this now in-flight kind of augmentation of that service is really good. If you think about what drives the cost for the carrier, it's what we refer to as stop cost. So how many times does that vehicle, that collection and delivery vehicle, start and stop, driving down the street, stop, how many parcels do I get to deliver? That's the cost, right? So that's probably one of the key costs that carriers will focus on. So if they can optimize that and actually keep the consumer happy by going, I'm not going to card you, I'm not going to try and deliver because that's going to drive a second delivery attempt, that's going to cost more money. It's kind of right in that sweet spot. The thing that we always talk about is try and keep everyone happy. So you're keeping the consumer happy, you're controlling your own cost, and you're keeping the retailer informed via say sorted. Everyone's a winner.
So is it fair to say that as a retailer, adopting a more deliberate pick-up drop-off strategy, that's a viable route for me, reducing carriage costs?
Yeah, definitely, because again, in the rounding, when a carrier is quoting you for your business, they're going to look at the trends of second delivery attempts. On time in full is like a key metric for retailers and carriers, but first time delivery success is a real cost driver. So I think by retailers offering that option up front, you're gonna increase that first time delivery success and that on time in full metric. So that should reflect itself in the cost then, because the carriers are all about trying to predict what your traffic is going to cost, and then obviously they need to make a margin as well. So I guess the general theme is the more you can reduce the in the rounding broad brushstrokes approach to cost and be much more specific around, look, we know what this is going to feel like to deliver this traffic profile, should result in a keener bottom line.
Got it. One of the things that often comes up in conversations relating to carrier management and obviously all the data that flows through a CMS like ours, is the potential tooling that gives to a carrier operations manager or a carrier manager for rates and contract negotiations. Is that something you believe to hold true? Is, you look at CMS versus non-CMS. Am I, as a retailer, in a stronger position to negotiate and work more collaboratively with my carrier partners if I'm in possession of a CMS versus I'm not? What does that look like?
Yeah, I would definitely support that theory. Honesty is the best policy. So it's all about data-driven decisions and data-driven opportunities, really. So I've said this maybe a couple of times in this conversation, but avoiding any kind of, let's be honest, right? I've seen retailers do this for many years, hyperinflate their estimated volumes to try and attract a keener price, right?
Mm.
It's gonna wash out in the end because it's gonna be absolutely obvious. So if you've got CMS data and you can remove that doubt and you can actually go, I can show you forensically what our traffic profile looks like. I can actually show you the allocation by day to what service. I mean, we provide this in our service review packs with customers. So a forensic breakdown of volume by carrier service, by geography. Being able to take that to a carrier partner at the point where you're negotiating a new deal is like, that is fabulous data because you're removing all the doubt. If there's doubt, there's only one thing that a service provider can do, and that's add some kind of buffer. There's got to be some kind of commercial buffer in there that goes, if that volume doesn't fall to ground exactly like that, I can't be commercially disadvantaged. I can't lose my shirt on this deal. Otherwise, that would be risky, for anyone as a practice. So generally, to that question, are you better off with a CMS or not? I would say yes, because it will give you that data that you can then present in a really honest, upfront manner with a carrier.
Cool. So to summarize then, I think what we've kind of got out of the conversation is CMS, hugely valid source of indisputable, almost indisputable, perhaps an overly emotive term, data that enables a carrier professional to go and have meaningful conversations with their carrier partners. And then smart allocation is really all about setting the parameters to make sure that you've got who's available to deliver the good at this value in this size box to these destinations at these expected times. Pick up, drop off, great customer experience, potentially very, very powerful for a retailer to improve that first time delivery success, which obviously is a cost driver. Thanks, Paul. That's been a really informative chat. I think we've covered some good ground, and it's quite clear that there's a lot of levers that can be explored for retailers in last mile efficiency, cost reduction, and in particular pick up drop off as a lever within that as well. So yeah, good to chat that through with you.
No problem. Cheers, Dan.
Don't forget to review, subscribe, and follow us on LinkedIn for more insights. We've got another chat like this one dropping really soon, so stay tuned. In the meantime, all our episodes from series 1 and 2 of the Sorted Retail Sessions podcast can be found on our website or wherever you get your podcasts.